My name is Lily. I work as an editor at a big publishing company in the city. I've always considered myself a simple person, not one to chase after big dreams or drama. Life kept me busy enough with deadlines and the occasional quiet moment I could steal for myself. But if I'm honest, there's another reason I kept my life simple. I never wanted to get caught up in things that would complicate it, like relationships or dating. That all changed one bright, sunny Sunday. It was a day like any other. I was walking through the park near my apartment, headphones on, listening to my favorite podcast. The park was full of life. Children laughing, dogs barking, families enjoying their day together. I was in my own world, lost in the soothing sound of voices in my ears. That's when it happened. Suddenly, a loud voice broke through the bubble I was in. "Watch out!" someone shouted. I looked up just in time to see a man on a bike swerving to avoid me. My heart jumped as I stepped back, nearly stumbling over my own feet. "I'm so sorry," I blurted, pulling out my earbuds and feeling my face flush with embarrassment. The man stopped his bike and turned to look at me, his expression switching from annoyance to amusement. "No worries," he said, his voice still carrying a hint of irritation, but with a smile softening the edges. "You were right in the middle of the bike path." "I didn't even realize," I admitted, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear. I had no excuse, really, except that my mind had been elsewhere. The man chuckled, and I felt the tension between us dissolve a little. He wasn't bad-looking, I noticed. He had a rugged charm about him, like someone who spent a lot of time outdoors. "I'm Jerry," he said, extending his hand. "Lily," I replied, shaking it. His handshake was firm, and his eyes lingered on mine just a second longer than necessary. "So, Lily, do you always walk around with your head in the clouds?" he asked, smirking. I laughed nervously, still feeling a bit flustered. "Only on Sundays," I joked. "I think my brain's already checked out for the weekend." He grinned, and for a moment, I felt a strange spark. "I was just heading over to that cafe," he said, pointing to a small place at the edge of the park. "Care to join me? I owe you a coffee for nearly knocking you over." I hesitated. I wasn't used to saying yes to random coffee invitations, especially from strangers. But there was something about the way Jerry asked, so casually, that made it hard to say no. "Sure," I said before I could talk myself out of it. "Why not?" We walked to the cafe together, the awkwardness between us fading as we started talking. Jerry was easy to talk to. He told me about his job. He worked at a car dealership, which he said wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. He wasn't originally from the city. He moved here a few years ago, chasing what he called the big city dream. "And did you find it?" I asked, curious. He shrugged. "I found something, but I'm not sure it's the dream." There was a hint of something deeper behind his smile, but he didn't elaborate and I didn't push. We ordered our coffees and found a table by the window. As we sat there, I found myself relaxing. There was an ease to Jerry that I hadn't expected. Maybe it was the casual way he spoke, or maybe it was just the novelty of meeting someone new. Whatever it was, I found myself laughing at his stories and sharing bits about my life, too. "I work in publishing," I explained. "It's busy, but I love it. I've always been a bookworm, so it's a good fit." "Sounds like you're living the dream," he said with a grin, echoing my earlier question. "Book lover turned editor." "Something like that," I replied, smiling. As the conversation flowed, I found myself feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time: curiosity. I wanted to know more about Jerry, to understand the man behind the jokes and casual charm. There was something about him that felt different. Before I knew it, an hour had passed. "I should probably get going," I said reluctantly. "I've got some work waiting for me." "Yeah, me too," Jerry said, though he didn't seem in any rush to leave. "This was fun. Maybe we can do it again sometime?" I hesitated for just a second before nodding. "Sure, I'd like that." We exchanged numbers, and as I walked back through the park, I couldn't help but feel a little lighter. Maybe it was the sunshine, or maybe it was just the novelty of meeting someone new. but something told me that wasn't the last I'd see of Jerry. The next few weeks flew by. Jerry and I started texting each other, meeting up for coffee or lunch when we could. I found myself looking forward to our conversations. He was funny, charming, and had a way of making me forget about the stress of work, even if just for a little while. It didn't take long for things to progress beyond casual coffees. One evening, Jerry invited me out to dinner. We went to a cozy little restaurant downtown, logically the kind of place that felt intimate but not too fancy. Over dinner, we talked about our lives in more depth. He told me about his family. He had grown up in a small town, the youngest of 3 boys. His parents were traditional, he said, especially his mom. "She was always the one in charge at home," Jerry said, smiling as he talked about her. "But, in that old school way where the man works and the woman stays home." "That's interesting," I said, feeling a slight unease in my stomach. "Yeah," Jerry continued. "I mean, it worked for them. I guess I always figured I'd have something similar one day." I nodded, unsure how to respond. I'd never thought much about family roles, but I knew one thing for sure. I loved my job, and I couldn't see myself giving it up for anything. But I didn't say that out loud. Not yet. After dinner, we walked through the city, talking and laughing like we had known each other for years. When he kissed me goodnight, it felt natural, like the next step in something that had been building between us from the start. Jerry and I began seeing each other more often, and before long, we were officially a couple. Everything seemed perfect at first. He was attentive, fun, and we had an easy rhythm together. But soon, little things began to shift. It started with small comments, things that made me pause but didn't seem like a big deal at the time. We were at a friend's party one night when the topic of careers came up. "So, Lily, do you think you'll keep working once you have kids?" someone asked jokingly. Before I could answer, Jerry jumped in. "Oh, she'll cut back. Focus on family." I blinked, surprised. "I didn't say that," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. Jerry just smiled, brushing it off. "Well, we'll see, won't we?" The comment stayed with me, but I pushed it aside. Relationships are about compromise, I told myself. Maybe he was just teasing, but the teasing continued. A few weeks later, Jerry invited me to have dinner with his parents. I was nervous, but hopeful. Meeting the family always felt like a big step, a sign that things were getting serious. His parents lived in a quaint suburban home, the kind of place that felt frozen in time. "Lily, it's so nice to finally meet you." His mother, Mrs. David, greeted me warmly, pulling me into a hug. She seemed sweet at first, and dinner went well, until the conversation turned toward family. "So, Jerry's told us you're an editor," Mrs. David said as she passed the mashed potatoes. "That must keep you busy, but once you settle down, I'm sure you'll be ready to focus on family, right? A good wife supports her husband, My smile faltered. "I really love my career," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm not planning to give it up." Mrs. David's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Of course, dear, but you'll see. Once the babies come, everything changes. It's only natural." I glanced at Jerry, hoping for some kind of support, but he was focused on his plate, nodding along with his mother's words. The rest of the evening passed in a blur, my thoughts racing. On the drive home, I finally broke the silence. "Your mom has some strong opinions about what a woman should do," I said, glancing at Jerry. He shrugged. "That's just how she is. She means well." "But do you agree with her?" I asked, my heart pounding. Jerry hesitated for just a moment too long. "I think she's got a point. Family should come first." A cold weight settled in my chest. Despite the unease that lingered after that dinner, our relationship continued. I told myself it wasn't a big deal, that maybe I was overthinking things. But the truth was, I couldn't shake the feeling that we wanted different things. Still, love has a way of blinding you to the warning signs. Jerry and I got engaged a few months later. He proposed on a quiet night in, just the two of us. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it felt intimate and sincere. and despite the doubts that gnawed at the back of my mind, I said yes. The wedding planning started almost immediately. We both wanted something simple, a small ceremony with close friends and family. But as the day approached, the pressure started to build, not about the event itself, but about what our lives would look like afterward. After the ceremony, during the reception, Jerry's mom pulled me aside. Her smile was wide, but her eyes were serious. "Lily, dear, I'm so happy for you both. Remember, a good wife supports her husband, no matter what." I forced a smile, trying to brush off the growing tension in my chest. "Of course, Mrs. David," I said politely. "And when the babies come," she continued, her voice lowering as if she were sharing a secret, "it's best if you're at home. You can't trust strangers to raise your children." Her words felt like a warning, and the finality in her tone made my stomach churn. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Later that night, when Jerry and I were alone, I brought it up. "Your mom mentioned me staying home with the kids," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But you know I'm not planning to quit my job, right? Even when we have kids?" Jerry's expression hardened. "We'll see," he said flatly. "Things change. We'll do what's best for our family." His words echoed in my mind long after we went to bed that night. After the wedding, Jerry suggested we move to a bigger apartment, closer to his job at the car dealership. The place was nice, but it was right next to his parents' house. At first, I didn't mind. I told myself it was convenient, that living close to family wasn't a bad thing. But soon, I began to see the downside. His mom, Mrs. David, started visiting more often. She would drop by unannounced, offering advice, or rather critiques, on how I was managing the house. One afternoon, she let herself in while I was working on some emails. "Lily, dear, you really should focus more on keeping the house clean," she said, running a finger along the edge of the bookshelf. "A clean home is a happy home." "I cleaned yesterday," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "I work full-time, so it's hard to keep everything perfect." "That's just it," she replied, her tone sharp. "You work too much. If you were home more, you could take better care of things." I clenched my jaw, feeling the frustration rise inside me. But I didn't say anything. Not yet. As the weeks passed, the pressure from Jerry and his mother grew. Jerry started bringing up his idea of a traditional family more often, hinting that I should quit my job and focus on the house, and eventually, the kids. One evening, we sat at the dining table, a mess of bills and budgets spread out in front of us. I tried to show him how keeping both our jobs made more sense, especially with the way the economy was going. "Look at these numbers, Jerry. With both our incomes, we're not just getting by, we're saving. It doesn't make sense for me to quit," I said, pointing at the spreadsheet. Jerry shook his head. "It's not just about the money, Lily. It's about having a real family life like my parents had." I sighed, feeling the frustration building inside me. "But it's not the past, Jerry. Things are different now. We both need to contribute." The conversation ended in tense silence, and I knew that this wasn't going away. Things got more complicated with his mother living so close. She dropped by almost daily, always with some new piece of advice or criticism. One afternoon, she arrived unannounced, this time to teach me how to budget properly. "You spend too much," she said, dragging me to the supermarket. She pointed out the cheapest products, urging me to buy the lowest quality items. "Stop wasting money on expensive things," she scolded, as we walked through the aisles. Back home, she demonstrated how to dilute dish soap to make it last longer. "You use too much of everything," she lectured. "You need to learn to make do with less." Every visit felt more suffocating than the last. I was losing myself in this life, trying to meet impossible expectations. I didn't know how much longer I could take it. Then, one rainy Friday evening, it all came to a head. I was on the phone with my mom, venting about everything: Jerry, his mother, the pressure I felt every day. "I just don't know how much more I can take," I said, my voice shaking. "She's always here, criticizing everything I do." My mom was angry. "Lily, that's not right. You need to talk to Jerry, set some boundaries. Just as she finished speaking, Jerry stormed into the room, his face flushed with anger. He had heard everything. Without warning, he snatched the phone from my hand. A wife shouldn't be complaining about her husband and mother-in-law like some kind of gossip, he snapped, before hanging up the call. I was stunned, my heart racing. Jerry, you can't just— Oh, I can't? He interrupted, his voice rising. Maybe if you had more respect for us, I wouldn't have to. Respect? I shot back, my own anger flaring. I'm your wife, not a puppet for you and your mom to control. Then act like it, he shouted, his face inches from mine. I stared at him, disbelief coursing through me. This wasn't the man I had married. If you don't like how things are, then maybe you should leave, he said coldly. Go ahead, get out. It was pouring rain outside, and it was the middle of the night. I stood there for a moment, my mind racing, but then I realized I had to go. Without a word, I grabbed my laptop, some clothes, and my phone. When I reached for my purse, Jerry grabbed it. You think you're leaving with this? I earned this money, not you. Fine, I said, my voice hollow. Keep it. I called a taxi and waited by the door, my heart pounding. When it arrived, I stepped out into the rain, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. I was doing this. I was leaving. The hotel room was small and unfamiliar, but it was a refuge. As I lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling, I felt a mix of emotions: relief, sadness, fear. But more than anything, I felt free. The next morning, I called a lawyer and made an appointment to discuss filing for divorce. It felt surreal, like I was living someone else's life, but I knew it was the right decision. At the lawyer's office, I went over the details of our marriage, the shared accounts, the apartment, everything that needed to be untangled. He was thorough, explaining the process and what I could expect. You'll need to serve these to your husband, he said, handing me a sealed envelope. Divorce papers. With the envelope in hand, I returned to the apartment I had shared with Jerry. He was still asleep when I arrived. The apartment felt different now, colder, emptier. As I packed my things, Jerry eventually woke up. What's going on? He mumbled, rubbing his eyes. I didn't answer. Instead, I handed him the envelope. These are for you. Jerry opened the envelope, his face hardening as he read the contents. Divorce? He scoffed. You think you can just walk away from this? I looked him in the eye, feeling a strength I hadn't felt in months. Yes, I said simply. We're done. As I walked out of the apartment for the last time, the air felt different, crisper, lighter. It was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of emotions. I threw myself into work, immersing myself in the world of publishing. The familiar chaos of deadlines and manuscripts became my sanctuary, a place where I could lose myself and rebuild the parts of me that had been chipped away. Slowly, I began to reconnect with friends, people I hadn't seen in months. We met for drinks after work, shared meals on the weekends, and little by little, I started to feel like myself again. Then, one evening, I received an unexpected call. It was Jerry. His voice was awkward, almost desperate. Lily, I got laid off, he started, stumbling over his words. Things are rough right now, and I was thinking, maybe we could start over. You know, rebuild. I felt a surge of anger and disbelief. After everything, he wanted to start over? Jerry, you think I'd come back after everything? I said, my voice firm. I'm doing better now. I'm free and I'm not giving that up. There was a pause on the other end of the line. So that's a no? He asked, sounding small. That's a no, I replied, feeling the finality of the words. As I hung up the phone, a sense of empowerment washed over me. I had made it through the storm, and now there was nothing holding me back. I was free.